So in the last video we left off with some HTML and CSS, which produced this guy right here, and we saw an example of a form. I also showed you how to inject CSS into the page. There's two different ways. We do inline with a style, this guy right here, and this guy's the CSS, or we could do it in tag or as the value of an attribute, this guy right here. Now in many more videos back I showed you a REPL, a read evaluate print loop, that we could execute or run JavaScript in the browser using the JavaScript engine. So we could open up the console like this and we can write JavaScript right into it. So all this hello or the alert function does is show a pop-up with the string. So just like that, we get the pop-up hello world. But the JavaScript we write in a REPL doesn't actually permanently change the page. It's temporary. So how do we go about permanently injecting JavaScript into our HTML? Well, we can do it three different ways. We'll talk about the first two, and the third we'll talk about in a different video. So the first way is just like CSS. We can do it as the value of an attribute. So if we go down here, we see our form tag right here. So in tag. The form has an attribute called onSubmit. And that attribute, as a value, can take a JavaScript code. So onSubmit. So let's move our alert from our REPL into the inline, the tag, the attribute. So same thing, alert, hello world, do capital H, hello world. And now when we refresh the page, we should get perfect. All right, so all the onSubmit attribute does is it ties or links with the button type submit. So when we press the button submit, it calls the onSubmit attribute, and that calls the JavaScript in the value. In this case, it's the alert. So when we click the submit button, we get the exact same behavior, the hello world pop-up. Now the second way of injecting JavaScript into our code is inline, again, just like CSS. Whereas CSS uses this style tag, we use a script tag for JavaScript. So let's move our alert call from in tag to inline. So script, let's do this guy here, alert, same thing, hello world. And let's take it away from the tag. So we'll delete it down here. And now when we refresh our page, we get this behavior right here. Why did it call right away? Why is it that when we wrote the alert in the REPL, we had to hit enter in order for it to call the function? When we wrote it in the tag, or as the value of an attribute, we had to hit the submit button in order for it to call the function, but now it just executes right away. Why did that happen? Well, HTML is a line-by-line executed language. And so when the HTML gets to line 34 right here, what we write in JavaScript is call the alert function. If we want to delay that behavior, we have to write proper JavaScript. So let's wrap this alert function in a different function. We'll call that function say hello. So say hello, and we'll move the alert in there. And now when we refresh the page, we should get perfect. It doesn't get called. So how do we call the alert function now? Well, we can combine inline and in tag. And so we've defined a function inline. Let's go call it in tag. Exact same way. So our form has an attribute called onSubmit, and the onSubmit value takes JavaScript. So instead of calling alert, we'll call our function say hello. And now when we refresh the page and click the submit button calls onSubmit, onSubmit calls say hello calls alert, and we get just like that. But we haven't actually done anything. JavaScript is made to provide interactivity between the user and the page. So how do we get JavaScript to interact with the page? How do we get it to manipulate the page? Well, to understand that, we need to understand something called the DOM, the Document Object Model. And so in the last video, we left off capturing references from HTML into CSS. We captured IDs and we captured classes. And in CSS, if we wanted to reference or capture a class, we'd use the period followed by the class name. If we wanted to capture an ID, we'd use a hashtag followed by the ID name. This is CSS here. How do we do the same but with JavaScript? Well, this is what the DOM is for. DOM is another middleman. It's an API. And so think of it like a business meeting. You're at a business meeting pitching some sort of product to investors because you need their money. And so this guy, and this guy. But the head investor, the CEO, the guy who has all the money, he's in a different country somewhere. He's not at the meeting. You expected him to be at the meeting, but he's not there. But this guy right here tells you that he represents the CEO. And so what this guy says goes. What this guy says should be treated like this guy, the actual head honcho, saying it. That's who the DOM is. We're not allowed to access the actual HTML. We're not allowed access to the actual CEO. We have to go through a representative. That's what the DOM is. And so we write our code, our JavaScript code. We interact with the DOM. The DOM interacts with the CEO, or the actual HTML tree. Oops. And there we go. And when you manipulate the actual HTML tree, it manipulates what gets seen on screen. And so we have this pipeline here where we go from our code through the DOM goes through the HTML, and that gets, or just manipulates what gets shown on screen. Now, how do we capture references though? That's what we're trying to talk about here. How do we get the IDs and the classes? Well, when we're capturing these elements in CSS, we refer to them as elements. So we capture elements in CSS. We don't capture elements, quote unquote elements, in the DOM. We capture nodes. They're referred to as nodes or node lists. And all a node is an object. Everything in JavaScript is an object. If you don't know what an object is, I should have a video coming out about objects, if it's not already out. So all an object is a bundling of key value pairs. So key value pairs. And these key value pairs represent properties or functions or methods of the object. So let's say we're capturing a paragraph node. You could say element, but they're referred to as nodes. One property of the paragraph node, this guy, the paragraph tag, would be maybe color, right? So we could change the color of the text to red. That's all an object is. It's a bundling of key value pairs. These key values represent properties or methods of the object. And so how do we go about capturing these nodes so we can work on their properties? Let's look at some actual code. So where are we going to write this code? Let's write it inline. If we wrote it in tag, it would just muck up all of the HTML, look gross. So let's go up to our inline script tag. Now everything in JavaScript is an object. So the document object model, the DOM, gives us an object. This is who the DOM is. It's the document. And we call methods or properties of the object, of the document object, using object notation. Again, if you don't know what an object is, I should have a video coming out. And so it's the name of the object followed by a period followed by the method name. And so like we captured this in CSS. See up here, this username, we captured a reference to the element using the hashtag, the ID username, which changes this guy to blue. Let's do the same, but with the JavaScript. So the ID of the span is username. And the document, the DOM document object model, has a method called getElement by ID name. By ID. The ID is username. We don't have to put the hashtag. And we have to capture or put this reference, this node, into something. So let's put it into a variable called, we'll just say username. And just like that, we've captured a node on the HTML tree. Now, any code you write in your index.html, it will get mirrored or transfer over to your REPL. So we can open up the console in our browser. So when we type in username, we're asking the REPL to tell us who we have, and we get a null. Now, why did we get a null? Well, like I said before, HTML gets executed line by line. And so when our HTML gets to line 39, it captures an element or a node on screen with the ID username, this span guy here. But because we're capturing the span before it's even printed out, before it's even displayed on screen, we're capturing nothing. And so we need to move our inline script below the body script. And so generate all the HTML to the page, and then we can capture that element, that node. So now when we type in username, we should get a printout of the node. And there we go. That's our span. We can interact with that like an object. Same thing. Everything in JavaScript is an object. So object notation, let's change the color of the username from blue to green. So username, the name of the variable, object notation, so a period. There's a property called style, and there's a property in style called color. So we'll change that to green. And just like that, we get the username to change to green. Now we don't need to use IDs and classes to capture references. We can capture references using tags, just like CSS. To do that, we call a different method of the document object model. So let's put it into let's capture the image logo, the image tag. So const, we'll say JS logo is equal to document dot get elements by tag name. There we go. Now notice we're going to get the image tags. Now notice the syntax here. Get element by ID and get elements by tag name. This guy returned a node, a single node in the network. This get elements by tag name, it returns a node list. All a node list is an array of nodes. If you don't know what an array is, I'm coming out with videos on arrays. Just understand that we access different items in the array with array notation. So square brackets followed by a number. This number represents the list item. And so all this line is going to do is it's going to capture all of the images in our page. Since we only have one, it's going to capture this one. So let's save and refresh. And now when we type JS logo, we get a list back. And as you can see, the first element in the list is the Wikipedia logo there. So now let's use object notation to change it again. So JS logo, let's do a style. Let's alter the width, let's say 200 pixels. And we want to alter the first element, so don't forget the array notation. 200 pixels, and just like that, our picture gets skewed. Now, like I said, the code you write in the REPL isn't permanent. So when we hit refresh, it goes back to baseline. If we wanted to make permanent changes to the DOM, to the HTML, we'd have to write it inline. So let's repeat that same code, but let's do it inline. So JS logo, which is a node list, will access the first element of that node list. We'll go to the property style. The property style has a width, and we'll change the width to 200 pixels. And now when we refresh the page, we get the skewed logo. And so as you can see, we can capture multiple nodes in a network using either IDs or classes or just the tag name. When we capture one node, we get one node back. When we capture many nodes, we get a node list back, which is just an array of nodes. And we also don't have to just style or manipulate the style of the nodes we capture. The DOM allows us to manipulate or see the information in these elements, in these nodes, which is to say it allows us to see the information that the user types into their forms, which allows us to capture that information. And when we capture that information, we can send it to the backend. This is what the next video is going to be about. It's going to be about this form, how to get the information from the form. But what did we go over in this video first? Well, we saw that we could inject JavaScript into our HTML in two different ways. Either in tag as the value of an attribute, or either in line, just like CSS. But instead of style, we use the script tags. We also saw that order mattered in the HTML. And so if we didn't properly write JavaScript to encapsulate our functions, these functions would run right away. Also, if the page wasn't loaded, we couldn't capture the nodes on the page. The page has to load before we can actually capture things. We also talked about the DOM, the document object model. And the document object model was a representation of the actual HTML. And since we're not allowed to actually manipulate the HTML, we have to go through the representative. And so this pipeline of writing our JavaScript code, manipulating the DOM manipulates the HTML, and the HTML manipulates what gets shown on screen. And finally, we saw how to capture these nodes. The document object came with methods: get elements by element by ID, get elements by tag name, there's get element by class. This is how we capture the nodes. And so in the next video, what we're going to be taking a look at is we're going to go deeper into the form. We're going to capture the form node, and then using the form node as an object, we're going to access its PIN number and username data, and then we're going to do some stuff with that data. So like always, if you see any value in this, like, comment, share, subscribe, thumbs up, whichever platform you're watching this on, and I will see you guys in the next one.